the metamor relationship, I think, is one of the most special parts of non-monogamy. And so to see the way that two people who weren't directly in a relationship themselves, but shared a partner, had this really special connection, intimate, certainly in some ways, almost like a sibling type relationship where you may not be fully on the same page as the other person at the same time, but you hold this common bond. And I think in that, it really helped me pull back the frame a little bit and understand that non-monogamy and polyamory is not just about maintaining multiple intimate or romantic relationships yourself. It's about everything that comes along with that and around that, the metamor connections, the community, the relationship skills, the vulnerability, the personal growth. That to me was when I realized that non-monogamy is so much more than just dating multiple people.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Welcome to episode 341. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have another interview for you. This one is with Brett. It is incredible. Brett has been exploring non-monogamy for the last several years. It's looked different ways, and today in this interview, he walks us through his journey, which has ebbed and flowed, and he interweaves his amazing advocacy work as well.
Yeah, Brett is the founder of the nonprofit organization OPEN, which stands for the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy. Brett's definitely going to tell us all a little bit more about the work OPEN does, but in short, OPEN is a nonprofit organization dedicated to normalizing and empowering non-monogamous individuals, relationships, and communities. Absolutely incredible work. We've gotten to go to some of the events that Brett has hosted. We got to go to a celebration event a couple of weeks ago in Oakland after Oakland passed non-discrimination laws for non-monogamous people. So yes, amazing. Well, not just non-monogamous people. It's much more complicated than that, but amazing work that Brett and his team at OPEN have spearheaded. So a huge thank you to Brett for coming on, for sharing your story, and for sharing about the work you do and for doing the work you do.
We also want to mention that OPEN is spearheading the Week of Visibility for Non-Monogamy in July. That's going to be July 15th through the 19th. We would highly encourage you to check this out. Get involved.
This was an upgrade. Last year, it was the Day of Visibility.
I know, and now it's a week.
7 times bigger.
Woohoo!
Well, 5 times bigger.
But also, we will be doing a free workshop on the 17th of July. More information will be coming very soon about that, but that workshop will be part of the Week of Visibility activities.
Yeah, it's going to be our Is There a Right Way to Do Non-Monogamy workshop that we've done before. We did this at Southwest Love Fest a few years ago. We've run it virtually a few times, and we're excited to help bust some myths around non-monogamy. So.
Yes, and support the Week of Visibility, which we're, again, so excited about. And thank you, Brett, for just all of the amazing work that you've done.
Yep. So mark your calendars for that week. We will see you then. And until then, we're going to jump right into the interview for anybody who is a premium subscriber. And for the rest of you, we've got a couple of what I would think are some of the best announcements in the podcasting industry.
Clearly.
Yes.
First up, if you're not familiar with the premium subscription, it is a way to skip these announcements up front, even though they're the best.
They are the best, yeah.
But you could skip these announcements up front, jump right into the interview. However, you would still get important dates in the outro. Today, we do not have any important dates to tell you, but there will be more in the future.
There is one important date.
Actually, Week of Visibility. We already said it.
July 17th is an important date, Emma.
Yes.
So, yes.
That was a lie.
Don't miss it.
I was not telling the truth. So, the Week of Visibility. Anyway, if you're still interested here and listening in the premium subscription, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage, and you can sign up right there.
Then scroll all the way back up to the top and you can learn more about our virtual community, which is full of amazing people from all over the world who are supporting one another, loving one another, having fun with one another. We laugh a lot in there. We have a good time.
We do.
Yeah, we got about 300 of us. We would love for you to join us if you're looking for open-minded people. You don't have to be non-monogamous. Maybe you're in a non-monogamous partnership and you're the monogamous partner.
Yep.
Or maybe you're not non-monogamous at all. You just want to hang out with awesome people like us. We'd love to have you.
Yes.
There's lots of us in there. We're having a good time. To find out more, click on that community tab. You can sign up for as little as $5 a month, and we'd love to have you join us. We'll see you in there.
Next up, a plug for our favorite way to get tested for STIs. It is stdcheck.com. You can use the links on the resources page and get $10 off a 10-panel test, making it only $129. And you get to support the podcast and the show, our work in the meantime. And the best part is you get to know your sexual health status. Again, STD Check is a service that Finn and I use. We love it. It is so simple and discreet. It is just a great service. So go and check it out.
I couldn't agree more, Emma. That's why I use it.
Yes.
All right. With that, we will just tell you one more time to send us an email. Send us an email. We would love to have you send us an email, send us a voicemail. We would love to hear from you is what I've been trying to say. Not doing a great job of it. I got all tongue-tied, but you can do that on not on the community tab, on the contact us tab of our website. I don't know. You know how email works. Tell us what you think about the show. If you want to come on the show, yeah, just figure it out. I'm done getting tongue-tied here.
You can also send us a voicemail. That's an option as well.
Bonus points if you're more tongue-tied than I am.
Anyway, we would love to hear from you. And now I think we're all set with these announcements. We'll jump into the interview with Brett and we'll see.
Best announcements in the whole podcasting industry.
True. And we'll
most tongue-tied announcements. All right, here we go, Brett. Let's go talk to Brett.
We'll see you on the other side. Welcome, Brett, to the podcast. We're happy that you're here today. I was just going to say it was a nice sunny day, but that was yesterday. Today's not quite as nice as sunny.
Well, and yesterday was Brett's birthday. So happy belated birthday, Brett.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Emma and Finn.
And thank you for being here. We would absolutely love to start just by having you introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Brett Chamberlain. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called OPEN, which stands for the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy. But of course, OPEN is just a little more concise. We are an advocacy nonprofit working to advance cultural acceptance and legal rights for non-monogamous families and relationships of all varieties.
Concise and convenient that the lettering worked out that way to spell
exactly.
Open, huh? Yeah. Total coincidence, I'm sure. We're super excited you're here. Super excited to shine a little more of a spotlight on the work you and Open are doing. And also, I mean, many of the Open's board members have been on the show in the past. And so we're very familiar with the work and excited to have you here, Brett. So yeah, again, thank you for being here.
Likewise, I've been looking forward to getting the chance to chat with you.
Yeah, well, maybe let's dig in a little bit to the personal side of Brett and maybe what does, non-monogamy look like for you today? And then we're going to kind of figure out how in the world we got here to where you're founding organizations to drive forward the sort of equality and inclusivity of non-monogamy.
Yeah. So, my journey into non-monogamy was, I think, non-linear, like many people's. Started exploring quasi-open relationships when I still lived on the East Coast, but it was a time that I didn't really have much of the vocabulary or really awareness of non-monogamy or polyamory. And there were certainly some road bumps in that. When I moved out to the Bay Area in 2016, I live now in the East Bay of the California Bay Area. I found myself living with some roommates who were polyamorous. They were a polyamorous couple. And so I had the chance to really see firsthand quite what it looked like in practice and to learn some of the core skills from them. I thought this looks pretty great, actually. I saw this lovely, thriving, healthy relationship that wasn't just a relationship as an island, but a relationship as an archipelago, connected and networked with this other range of really beautiful connections that were able to provide meaningful support and joy to one another. And that really sparked my curiosity. My pathway into it individually was a little bit more through the Bay Area sex positive scene. So by chance, I ended up at a party that had a play space and connected with a really wonderful community of folks, met my the person that I would go on a date for some years at that event. And that really was my full immersion into the non-monogamy and sex positive scenes. And of course, it's continued to be a learning journey. I think that, all of us are called to continue to work on building our capacity for relationships, building our relationship skills, no matter how many of those relationships we sustain. But I've just really enjoyed being immersed in a community that really puts an emphasis on building relationship skills, on supporting one another in relationship, on giving relationships room to breathe and grow and take whatever shape or form they need to. And so it's been really not just deeply rewarding for me, but frankly transformative in my life, because of course it's led to me being in this position and doing the work that I'm doing now.
Amazing. Well, I love the sort of high level overview, and I'm excited to kind of dig in a little bit to it. And also, I think it's funny the vision that maybe people get sometimes when they come to the Bay Area is like, you think you're going for coffee and you wind up at a sex party somehow. And it's just like, oops, I didn't know. But it's not quite that fluid, I don't think.
No,
but it's, it's not.
But it's not. It's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity for both.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. The joke that you can't throw a stick without hitting a non-monogamous person in the Bay Area is like not wrong. I mean, we shouldn't go throwing sticks around, but.
Yeah. Yep, fair enough. Well, let's say back before you came to the epicenter, when you were on the East Coast, sort of you sort of described it as exploring sort of some quasi open relationships, and I'm curious what did that look like back then, and what was sort of the framework you were bringing to that? Did you have models of this for yourself, or did you sort of actually stumble into it?
Yeah, I would say it was closer to stumbling. So at the time I was living in New York City, and I had a girlfriend who lived in Western Massachusetts. So we would generally take turns going back and forth. But during the week or the weekends that we weren't able to be together, we came to an agreement that it would effectively be an open relationship. But unfortunately, we didn't have a ton of vocabulary or a real understanding of the need to continue to actively maintain that agreement, to explore the emotional and relational implications and complexities that come along with that. So I think it was more something that I think open relationships are very easy and accessible and fairly well understood, but unfortunately don't often come with the same degree of intentionality. And again, that's not to make a judgment against all open relationships, but I think it's something that it's very easy for people to pull off the shelf and ignore some of the underlying work and obligations and complexities that come along with that.
Yeah.
At least that was my experience. Perhaps I can keep it grounded in my own.
Totally. Yeah. The idea like, we can do this. Let's just do this. Right. Like it's going to play a game of, basketball or something like, well, I want to play around with some basketball today, or I want to tinker with this thing. Like it's not that you can't, dabble or explore, but there is work that comes along with it.
Right. And I think that with many forms of relationship, people often want to grab a label and say, okay, this is an open relationship now, and fail to account for the fact that open relationship can mean a lot of different things for different people. What are the agreements? What are the boundaries? What are the expectations with regard to what type of contact, physical, intimate, romantic is permissible? How do we address what we know or don't know about what the other person is doing?
Yeah.
And I think that was some of the piece that was frankly missing, just to own my own failures in those earlier phases.
Totally. And I'm curious what it sort of looked like at that time, right? Sounds like she was living in Massachusetts. You're living in New York City. I guess just roughly, were you sort of dating separately, or was it, hey, we'd get together, on weekends and go out together and try to meet people? Like, what did it kind of look like in those early days for you?
Yeah, at that time, neither of us were really dating, nor were we, exploring other connections together. It was really more of a, if you meet somebody cute at a bar and end up making out sort of thing. There's not really worries around that.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And so then you pick up and move into the Bay Area and sort of land with
little did you know,
land with some roommates who are non-monogamous, and sort of sounds like they presented you with a just sort of an eye-opening experience.
Or maybe a different lens, too, it kind of sounds like, from what you were experiencing previously.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I've reflected often on, had you asked me in 2015 when I was living in New York and exploring open relationships, what I might know about polyamory, I'm not really sure how well I would have been able to answer. I'm sure I had heard the phrase, but I doubt that I could give you much more than a very rudimentary explanation. And so a big part of that early phase was just understanding like what it was, but more critically, how it worked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you got to see that sort of firsthand, not necessarily, well, maybe not firsthand, not from your own living, but from living with people, watching them sort of move through the space in a much more intentional way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that was most eye-opening for me in that was seeing the metamor relationship. The metamor relationship, I think, is one of the most special parts of non-monogamy. And so to see the way that two people who weren't directly in a relationship themselves, but shared a partner, had this really special connection, intimate, certainly in some ways, almost like a sibling type relationship where you may not be fully on the same page as the other person at the same time, but you hold this common bond.
Yeah.
And I think in that, it really helped me pull back the frame a little bit and understand that non-monogamy and polyamory is not just about maintaining multiple intimate or romantic relationships yourself. It's about everything that comes along with that and around that, the metamor connections, the community, the relationship skills, the vulnerability, the personal growth. That to me was when I realized that non-monogamy is so much more than just dating multiple people. I know that for some people it is just a practice or a more narrow practice, but I think there's a reason that for many people it is an identity, and frankly, it's core to how they show up in the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's amazing. The one, I will say for myself, one of the things that was interesting to break apart was the idea that we don't have to compete with other people. And it's strange because I didn't ever really, like, I don't want to, but you often like feel it, or you feel the pressure to, right? Even if you're like, well, this is a stupid paradigm. Why are we competing over, comparison, competing, competition, all of that? And even if you're like, it feels gross and I don't want to do it, it's like it creeps in. And it sounds like that's, the metamor relationship is one of those places where you're really having to break away from an additional societal norm, right? There's the societal norm that we should just be one man, one woman. But then you're like, okay, well, I can break that down. And you're like, well, now I'm supposed to be, quote unquote, supposed to be friends with this person. And like, that's a whole new world to explore, is like, okay, well, I just kind of figured out how to do the first part. And like you said, now there's this like layer of, it's not just, I just get to go on dates and it's amazing. There's deepness, there's depth to it.
Right. And I think a piece of that depth that you just touched on that's really important to me, just given my political lens and worldview as well, is that fundamental shift from competition to cooperation, or put another way, from scarcity to abundance. Mm-hmm. I think that in many ways, the monogamous relationship, as we understand it, is frankly like a feudal age, originally political arrangement and then economic arrangement that has been sustained because it breaks people into these highly atomized households that are ultimately consumer units, right? So originally one salary and a homemaker, now often as not, two salaries. And you ensure that everyone's in their own little box, and every house needs to buy a vacuum cleaner so that you can sell maximal vacuum cleaners. Yep. And I think non-monogamy is part of a shift back towards more cooperative ways of living, where we recognize that human beings, frankly, have evolved for hundreds of thousands of years in tribal communities where we were in, tightly networked groups where people looked out for one another. And I think that is incredibly important for many of the challenges we're facing as a culture and as a society today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate that. And one thing you touched on just before that was around the delineation between an identity or non-monogamy as an identity or polyamorous as an identity. And just for yourself, where do you fall on that spectrum? Because we do talk to people who are like adamantly like, yep, it's my identity, and others who are like, no, it's sort of just, it's a thing I do. It's maybe one of my part of who I am, but not who I am.
Yeah, I mean, this I think is one of the three great questions that the non-monogamy community likes to debate.
Yep.
The other two, of course, being the ethics of hierarchical polyamory,
Yep.
and finally, whether or not polyamory constitutes, or non-monogamy broadly constitutes, a queer identity or should be considered as part of the LGBTQ spectrum. So those are the three great philosophical and in many ways, frankly, strategic questions around non-monogamy.
Yep.
To your question about identity versus practice, to me, it does feel like part of my identity. I really struggle to imagine being in a closed monogamous relationship. And as I mentioned, I think that the values of non-monogamy are deeply interwoven with my personal values and with the way that I move through the world. So it feels quite intrinsic to me. Now, I think at the end of the day, there's not any one answer to this question because it varies from person to person. And from a strategic messaging perspective, just, this is, of course, the lens I often take, given that advocacy is my primary role in the non-monogamy space. From a strategic messaging perspective, it doesn't really matter because we already grant people non-discrimination protections based on a range of non-intrinsic characteristics of their person, right? So things like marital status, things like religion, are not, certainly many of those can be part of people's identities, but they're things that people may assume throughout their life and aren't necessarily, born with. So I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's more interesting on an individual level and not something that we should let the argument be centered around, particularly when it comes to the extent to which non-monogamy is deserving of non-discrimination protections, because that's not really the question that issue should be founded on.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Yeah, and I think too, I totally agree. Like, it's such an individual thing, and I know it is one of the hot button topics that people are always debating around. And I think it's one of those where I just dream. I think of a world where we can look at this as one of those other places to cooperate and say, Brett sees it as an identity, Emma sees it as a practice, this other person sees it as maybe something completely different, and can we not have all of those coexist together? And I think the hard place is right where you start to bring in advocacy work or sort of policy work, where then they want to nail it down. And it's like, at the end of the day, for me, I think it is a very individuated thing, and we all sort of show up with our own lens, our own sort of approach to that. And I don't think any one of them is wrong.
Well, I think, just to your example was an example of we each can have our own journey in that. Even as you said that example, and you're like, Emma sees it as this and Brett sees it as this. And I was just like, ooh, is that true for me? That in the moment, I was like, oh, wait.
I was making that up, by the way.
Yeah, no, I know. But it was interesting to notice my initial reaction to hearing him say that. And it is such an individual journey and experience for people.
Right. And I think it's an important question for people to consider, particularly if they're newly exploring non-monogamy. Because I think one of the first questions that people need to ask themselves if they are opening up their relationship or interested in pursuing a non-monogamous relationship or relationships is, why do I want to do this? And so that is really interwoven with that question. Is this something that I feel deeply called to based on my first values? Or is this something I'm interested in exploring or experimenting with just as an activity or, as a lifestyle? Both are valid. Both are entirely valid. But I think you can learn a lot and avoid a lot of heartache for yourself and certainly for others by having a really keen sense of what it is that motivates and drives you and how you want to show up with that.
Yeah.
And also that it's okay to reevaluate that throughout your life. That you can grow and change and shift and reevaluate and then communicate to others if things have shifted. I think so often we're, put in this box of well, I decided one thing, I must be that the rest of my life. And clearly you don't have to do that either.
Exactly, which I think is again one of just the wonderful things about non-monogamy is it leaves space for people and therefore their relationships to change and grow. It breaks down, of course, that infamous relationship escalator where you're only moving in one direction or you get off entirely, and it allows our relationships and us as individuals to be flexible, fluid, flawed creations, really, in every moment.
Yeah.
I love that. And so you, bringing it a little bit back to your story, you land in the Bay, you've got some
Examples with your roommates.
you've got some amazing roommates. What sort of direction does this take you on personally as you start to explore for yourself?
He finds himself at a sex party.
That's right. Just
I did. You know, my first proper, quote unquote, proper, or whatever that means in this context. My first full blown play party was at Mission Control, a really iconic and beloved play space in the Bay Area, and then got quite integrated into a community at that time anchored largely around the Orgy Dome, the infamous Burning Man camp. So I then found myself integrated really into a social community that was anchored around a number of different scenes, including a monthly play series going on in the Bay Area at that time called Organ House, as well as through the Orgy Dome, the infamous Burning Man camp. You know, that just like 100x'd my exposure to these relationships, to these values. It provided me with far more kind of firsthand examples of what non-monogamy could look like in action. I had the opportunity to be in relationship with, I mean, not an intimate relationship, but in community relationship with people that had been married for 20 or 30 years and were non-monogamous, people raising kids, closed triads, a whole range of relationship practices and identities. And that was really it for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I think for many people, again, this is one of those where I think everybody has their own experience, but I think some people would go, yeah, that makes total sense. You land there, there's a sex party, why not go to it? And I think there's other people whose eyes might pop out of their head hearing even the leap from my roommates were non-monogamous to I wound up at Mission Control, which was a sex party. And I'm curious, just for you, how was that transition, or did it just sort of feel natural to you to be like, well, I'm at least going to go check out this space and see what it's about?
Yeah, it felt pretty natural to me, So as somebody that's been engaged in activism and organizing for my life, I have a real appetite for looking at and looking for ways that people can gather and organize community and orient around values outside of the prescribed mainstream heteronormative capitalist paradigm. And I really enjoy exploring those types of spaces and seeing what else could be out there, right? There's this a quote I love by the late great anthropologist David Graeber, which quite simply, the world is the way we make it. And I'm fascinated by exploring different ways that we might make the world. And so in some of those spaces, I found people making a world where we don't need to be averse to sex and sexuality and intimacy and vulnerability. And I really loved that world.
Yeah.
I love that world still.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's that openness to say, you could go to an experience like this, you could go to a party, and what will that make my world, right? And, in one sense, you could say, well, it doesn't have to make my world anything. I could go, I could experience it, I could leave, and I could never go back, and my world is relatively unchanged. Or I can go, I can have this experience, and if I'm open to it and it feels right, it could open up my world in a way and change my world in a way that I can't even imagine what would be coming next, or what would be coming in 5 or 10 years down the road if I'm open to that. And that's not to say if you're not open to it that you've somehow failed or you're closed-minded. I think it's just sort of two of the ways you could approach that.
Yeah, I think that these types of spaces, like so many transformative or radical spaces, provide a bit of a choose your own adventure. So if you want to go and, fuck around and, meet some cute people and, then go home and continue your life, fairly as it was, that's fine. That's great. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to confront your insecurities, if you want to build your capacity for communication, if you want to learn how to assess your needs and desires and express them and be ready to receive a no, if you want to confront, I think I said insecurities already, but that's probably an important point. So I'll say it again, whether that's relational or emotional or physical, right? Like being naked, dancing around other people. So there's just, it's almost a petri dish, and that's a terrible metaphor given the context. But we'll stick with it. Maybe we'll say it's it's rich soil for
Yeah.
you to grow whatever it is that you want to grow in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often think of it as like a sandbox. You get to go in and play with it and see what feels good.
Build what you want to build.
Yeah, build what you want to build. And then, you'll find, I think you often find people who migrate to your corner of the sandbox, be like, I like what you're building. I'm going to build that for a little while. And then you'll find people on the other side who are building something completely different. And that's okay. And like, just because we're all in the non-monogamy sandbox doesn't mean we're all building the same thing or want the same thing, or that we can't move around it and shift and change. And I don't know, I just can really appreciate your sort of openness to the exploration and creation of your own adventure.
Right. And, you touched on something important there, and that is that the non-monogamy scene, if you will, is not one thing. It's a whole range of things, right? So if you want to go and connect with the dance people or the cuddle people or the people doing, medicine work or the people that, work their tech job and want to go and just unwind and, party, like there's just so many things in that space. So it's a world of worlds. It's just a world of worlds oriented around a certain set of core values that I think run through them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can also I agree with everything you said. It was beautiful. And you don't have to, you can be non-monogamous too and not be in those spaces. And I think you can choose hey, you can try different things this doesn't really, these spaces don't really work for me for whatever reason right now in my life. I don't know. And you can still take that and practice relationships how they work for you.
It is an important one, right? Not all non-monogamous people go to sex parties. Not all people that go to sex parties are non-monogamous. I think, my personal journey, and I might argue that the Bay Area non-monogamy culture generally does imply, I think, more of a conflation of those two than is certainly, I think, the case for most people.
Yes.
And, it does risk further reinforcing, I think, one of the biggest stereotypes or stigmas about non-monogamy is that, it's a sex thing.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be ashamed of the sexual dimension and communities and spaces that are interwoven with non-monogamy for many folks. But I do think it's also worth disambiguating those two. So I appreciate you making that point.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily one and the same.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
But there shouldn't be shame around the sex parties either. That's the beautiful part of being human.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so for you, Brett, you started getting experience in various communities, started getting exposure to the ways other people could do it. It sounded like, long-term non-monogamous partnerships with children and larger, maybe polycules. And how did that sort of start to transform your experience here living in the Bay, moving from not necessarily from sex parties to something different, but just adding to that experience?
Yeah, it was a couple factors really converging. So to wind the clocks back a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, I've been doing activism and organizing for my whole life. I'll date myself a little bit by saying that I really came of political consciousness just at the beginning of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And I still remember when my parents brought me to a protest against the invasion of Iraq. I grew up in New Hampshire, so a relatively small town, and to be at that protest with people with signs and banners and chanting was this electrifying energy. And it really captivated me and set me on a path of really committing my life to trying to work towards justice. So after graduating college, my career, if you will, I do somewhat hate that term, it settled into the environmental nonprofit sector. And it was a job with an environmental nonprofit that brought me out to California in 2016, working for a fabulous organization called the Story of Stuff Project, which works on issues of waste and consumerism. But I had long been looking for where I could bring something new, where I could serve an underserved issue or a point of intervention. Because I think that you can make a much bigger impact being the 100th person working on an issue versus being the 10,000th person working on an issue. So at the time that I was finding myself more and more integrated into the non-monogamous and sex-positive communities in the Bay Area, I was also starting to feel like a bit of a cog in the nonprofit industrial complex. And again, I was deeply proud of the work that I was doing. I was very proud of the organization that I was working for. And I was also very aware that somebody else out there could be hired in to take my role. And I was really wondering, where is it that I can really bring some new capacity to this great and challenging project of human liberation. At the same time, I was also really interested in looking at how we can complement the work of transforming our materials technology, right? So building a sustainable kind of economy and material system with transformation in what I think of as our social technologies, right? So how can we ensure that not only are we building, more sustainable consumable materials, but how are we building more sustainable communities and relationships with ourselves, with one another, with the planet? And so at this time, as I was getting more involved in non-monogamy, I was starting to experience much of that transformation for myself. I touched on some of the ways earlier that I was finding myself building my capacity for self-awareness around my needs and desires, my capacity for clear communication, my capacity for intimate relationships. And I found myself in this community that was deeply transformative, where people were providing what, in the sort of anarchist literary tradition we call mutual aid, right? People were providing childcare and job connections and looking out for one another when they were sick. And it sort of felt like that thing that I had been looking for. It felt like people living in the way that I think we as a society would do well to live. And that's not to prescribe non-monogamy on everyone, but it is to make the point that community and connection is critically important. And loneliness and social isolation is deeply harmful to our civic health and our individual health. So these factors kind of converged. And the last element was that as I was, in contact and in conversation with more and more non-monogamous people, I was frankly shocked to find out that even in progressive areas like the Bay Area, people had to hide their non-monogamous identity because they were afraid of losing their job. They were afraid of community or family rejection. And it seemed like there was an opportunity to really take the leap. And this led to me at the end of 2021 leaving my salaried position at that organization and starting to put the pieces together to build Open, which we then launched in the spring of 2022. So actually this week is our 2-year anniversary.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think what
yeah, that's quite the journey.
I just so appreciate, and I find myself in this place often of I get excited about a thing. I maybe even find myself identifying with it, and then I'm like, well, why aren't more people doing it? Why is this even discriminated against at all? And I kind of picked up on tones of that, like, well, okay, I'm here in the epicenter where it's happening and it's happening around me. And I see all these amazing communities and I see people helping each other. Right. I mean, we've seen posts in like the Bonobo network where somebody's like, hey, I'm not feeling great this week, or I broke my leg. Can somebody come over and help me clean my house for an afternoon? And somebody's like, great, I'll see you on Thursday. Right. We see the community and you're like, okay, well, this is beautiful. Why does anybody have a problem with this? Why is there any pushback? And then you start to see it and you're like, okay, now you like, I feel this drive to like push back against the pushback and be like, no, this doesn't have to be combative. It doesn't have to be, but I don't know. I see a lot of myself in that like I get involved and then I get like really involved. If I'm going to get in, what is it? In for a inch, in for a mile, or is that how it goes?
Something in for like a penny, in for a pound, but take your pick. It all works.
Yeah.
Moving forward, I'm curious, first of all, I want to come back to Open, but personally, like what does your relational dynamic structure kind of look like today? Where has it led you to today?
Yeah. So right now I identify as polyamorous, although the label is not particularly important to me. I think that the labels and the identities are important insofar as they give us some point of reference around which to kind of understand ourselves and understand one another, and critically around which to politically organize. But I think the labels aren't particularly important, right? So for example, I was in conversation with some organizers from the swinger lifestyle, and we were talking about my relationship structure. And I was describing that at the time I had one partner, and we would, go to events and sometimes play together and sometimes play separately. And the folks I was chatting with said, yeah, it kind of sounds like you're a swinger. And I was like, I don't know, maybe so. So I just mean to make the point that these labels, they are squishy. So polyamorous is how I identify. But generally, I think I like the idea of relationship design, right? So it's that each relationship can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so funny that you say that, right? Because if what you're doing, let's say you call that polyamory, which you do, and they call it swinging, right? Their comment of, well, it sounds like you're doing swinging, and you could be like, well, no, it sounds like you're doing polyamory, right? It's just like the lens that we look through it at. It's just sort of we're just doing, and again, I'm one for using labels as a starting point, but
and then dig into what it means.
What does that even mean, right? Because it's funny, you say I'm polyamorous and I do this, and we go and talk to somebody else and they say I'm a swinger and I'm doing the exact same thing Brett's doing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, well, it's not like we're that far apart after all. We just use a different word to describe largely the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious for you in sort of the transition. I don't even know if it was a transition, just sort of the journey of sex party, non-monogamy, polyamory. Again, we just talked about how labels are largely irrelevant, but
a starting point.
Yeah, as a starting point for yourself, as you started to, you mentioned a few times, like expanding your capacity to have different communication or maybe next level communication or whatever way we want to describe that, or expanding your capacity to relate to people. What did that sort of look like for you? Did you come up against things in there that were unexpected that maybe you had to sort of work through and grow through as you were figuring out how to communicate better? Or could I have multiple partners, even though like maybe I believe it as like at sort of the belief level, but when I try to do it, it's really hard.
So I think when you're learning a new skill, you learn the new skill and then you go and do the thing, right? You're going to take years of music lessons before you go join the orchestra. You're going to spend years in plumbing school before you start, cleaning people's pipes. That's a bad metaphor, but we'll leave it in. With non-monogamy, you're not going to, years of classes and workshops before you start doing non-monogamous relationships. Certainly some people are, but I think for most people, it is a thing that you learn by doing.
Yep.
And it can be a precarious thing to learn by doing because relationships, any relationship, is complex. Feelings can get hurt. So that certainly was the case for me. I came into a non-monogamous relationship without a particularly deep understanding of not just what non-monogamy was. That part is much easier to pick up, right? You listen to fabulous podcasts like Normalizing Non-Monogamy with Emma and Finn. You read some books. I think that the harder piece and the piece that just does take more time and frankly requires making mistakes and then reflecting on that is understanding what non-monogamy means for you. What are my vulnerabilities and insecurities that are going to get tripped up and triggered? What are the things that are hard for me to talk about? What are the patterns from my own previous traumas or ways of being in the world that are going to continue to cycle? And how do I work to break them or just even account for them? And so this is, another one of the pieces that I tell people when they ask me, hey, I'm thinking about exploring non-monogamy. What should I know? The first one that I touched on earlier was know why you're doing it. But the second thing that I always tell people is do the self-work, right? Like do the self-work, get your house in order, make your bed, metaphorically, also literally too.
And wash your sheets while you're at it.
And wash your sheets between partners.
But yeah, like to get in there and to do your own work, like that is part of life and part of doing something that's more complex. To your point, it does take effort, it does take work, and we're all responsible. Like that's not to mean that things can't come up and things don't change and all of that, but like we're responsible for our own selves and our own self work and growth throughout this. And it sounds like, you've definitely run into some of that as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, what is really interesting about this one, and this is, I think, sort of what you were touching on, is with a lot of skills, my brain's stuck on basketball today. I don't know why, but it is, right? You say, well, I've always dreamed of going and playing basketball with this group of people. And so I've never picked up a basketball, so I'm probably not going to fit in there. So let me go and practice, and then I'll show up and play some basketball and I'll be relatively good at it, because the game of basketball over there is pretty much the same way I could play it in my backyard, at least how to shoot it. And I think when we bring in relationships and you bring in other people, you go out, you practice, and then you go to dribble that ball, and it's not a ball, it's a different shape and it bounces a different direction. And you're like, okay, well, I don't understand. The balls are different. The people are different. I'm different. I thought I was good at this, but then, and so you're like dealing with all of your own reactivity, your own stuff you're bringing and all of their stuff. And so there's, in many ways, there's no way to like fully prepare to just say, okay, I have quote unquote done all the work. I can now go do the practice. It's sort of this, you're weaving in practice, hurt yourself, hurt somebody else, break something, repair it, do some more work, try again, hurt somebody, hurt yourself, break something, try. Like it's this constant iterative process that is hard to know, like when can I go try it? When is the right time to dig in or trust myself that I can navigate an experience?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And you touch on a couple important points there. One being that just, the work is never done, right? As you point out, like the work of self-growth, like we will never be done growing. I mean, it's a joke I like to make too. Sometimes I've made a partner and say, yeah, I had a great therapy today. Like all done. I'm all healed. Everything is fixed. And of course it's never like that, though we might wish it were. So I think the point there is not, okay, work on yourself and fix your shit. It's learn how to work on yourself.
Yeah.
It's about the meta skills. Same too with relationships, right? Like no one is going to learn how to do a perfect relationship because every relationship is different. It's learning the meta skills of like, what does it take to sustain a healthy relationship? What does it take for me to recognize when I make mistakes and hold myself accountable for them, and not to expect that I will show up perfectly every time, that our relationship will be totally smooth sailing all the time and free from conflict. It's about how do you live in an imperfect world as an imperfect self with imperfect others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And wonky basketballs sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. And personal growth is an ongoing journey, right? It's an ongoing journey, and we have to each like figure out where we're at in that journey. And then it's like you conquer one thing and then you feel like you conquer one thing and then you're like, something else. And like, that's just part of life. And it's so, but it can be really discouraging sometimes and exciting when you're like, when you see growth. And I think like there's just non-monogamy or actually relationship designing the relationships that work for you, learning how to do that is such a beautiful opportunity to work on those skills for yourself. Not that you can't do it other ways, you definitely can. But this is like putting it on another level, I think, in a lot of ways to try to have to work through that stuff for yourself. And I guess, kind of moving into this a little more the work you do with Open. You started 2 years ago, and I'm curious kind of where you're at today and what you're excited about moving forward.
Yeah, I am really excited about where Open is at and where the overall non-monogamy movement is at. I think that people that have been in this space for a while have all observed that there is a real moment that has arrived. Many people link it back to the pandemic and say, we all went into isolation and realized that maybe we didn't want to spend every minute with that one other partner. We realized the importance of community and connection. I think that the jury is still out to what extent that's just a valid, has any meaningful explanatory value, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, the wave is cresting. There's a critical mass moment, I think, that is arriving for non-monogamy. I'm really excited that Open is part of that work at this time, because I think that there has been an incredible foundational work done by thinkers and educators and advocates and organizational leaders to help build the vocabulary, help us build the individual capacity to have successful relationships. And I think that as we've kind of, I don't want to say solve, but just I'll use that word for lack of a better one, like solve some of those first order problems, like how to do non-monogamy, like at an individual and community level fairly effectively. Now we're starting to say, okay, now what are these systemic barriers outside of ourselves that are making it challenging to live in this way? And people are starting to see that there is a broad social stigma against non-monogamy in the culture at large. People, as I mentioned earlier, are afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of losing housing. They're afraid that their non-monogamy will be brought up in a custody dispute. Somebody is getting a green card and they have to hide the fact that they're non-monogamous because the immigration officers will consider that not a valid relationship if it's not monogamous. A whole range of legal and cultural issues that are really overshadowing all the joy and beauty of non-monogamous relationships itself. You'd think I'd be able to say that word given how often I say it.
It's a tongue twister. It happens to us too.
We worked it into our name, so we decided we were just forever beholden to trying to use it. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
I often wonder how many times I type non-monogamy in a given week. I think it's probably a couple hundred.
Yep. Yeah. My phone auto fills it, but it always capitalizes it now. And so then I feel like I should go back and make it lower. It's a whole big thing. These are the problems we're dealing with over here.
Yep.
I wish that was it.
I wish that was it. These are the biggest issues in the non-monogamy space today, are whether or not your non-monogamy is capitalized and how many times.
Or how we pronounce it.
Right. But yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
None at all. So let me zoom in then a little bit more to what Open is working on specifically. So our work focuses on three major strategic areas. So first is just supporting people in the non-monogamous community, supporting non-monogamous families and relationships. So we do this in a couple ways. This looks like publishing educational resources. So at the end of last year, we published a end-of-life planning and death care guide for non-monogamous families and loved ones to help people navigate the complex and quite emotionally fraught process of having an end-of-life planning conversation. Like many of our systems, the death care field is set up with one particular type of family and relationship in mind. And that can mean that there are some real complex hurdles for people that are approaching that process as non-monogamous folks. So that's one example of the type of resource that we're putting out. Another is our twice monthly free peer support circles that we're really thrilled to offer. And those just create a safe space for people who are practicing non-monogamy or are new to non-monogamy to come together and get support around what it is that they're facing in their relationships at that moment. So those are some of the resources that we provide to support people in the non-monogamous space. The second domain of our work is around advancing visibility and acceptance for non-monogamous families and relationships. So this looks like our social media, our media engagement work, really just trying to promote an understanding of what non-monogamy is and push back against the stigmas and the myths as well. We put out educational resources like our fact sheet that are really helpful for starting a conversation or providing to journalists that are writing about this topic. So we're really just trying to give non-monogamous people a voice in this conversation and really change the way that non-monogamous people are portrayed and talked about. The final piece of the puzzle is where I think that the rubber really meets the road. And so this is about building grassroots movement power to actually start to tear down some of those systemic barriers. So there are two major programs in that domain. The first is our Open Workplaces initiative. So this is an effort to advance inclusion and acceptance for non-monogamous professionals in the workplace. So we have an Open Workplaces toolkit. It includes template policy language that you can advocate for within your company to put into the employee handbook and the hiring language, effectively to make it clear that the company views family and relationship structure as a protected category along with other already protected categories, and makes it clear that the company won't discriminate at hiring and won't fire people. It just makes it safe for people to be open in their workplace. The other piece of our power building strategy is our legislative advocacy. So this focuses on advancing or passing non-discrimination protections that prohibit discrimination on the basis of family or relationship structure. So I'm really proud that Open is behind the introduction of two non-discrimination bills in Berkeley and Oakland, California. The Oakland one, we very much expect to pass on April 16th. That'll be the first West Coast city to adopt these protections following Somerville and Cambridge, Massachusetts, which implemented them in 2023. And Oakland will also be the largest city to have done so, being one of the 50 largest cities in the US. We've got our sights set on more target cities, and we think that this is a really important intervention because, again, it just makes it safe for people to be open about their non-monogamous identity. And once people can open up, then we can have an easier time coming together and starting to advocate for some of the stickier and trickier issues that are very much on the radar.
Thank you, Brett, for sort of digging into a few of the nuts and bolts there. And again, super excited to shine a light on Open and the work.
So important.
Yeah, and the work you're doing. And, this isn't like tooting my own horn, but I've been on a few of the day of visibility or the week of visibility now calls and on a few of the calls. And one of the things that I really love and admire about the work you're doing and the way that you handle the space is that this isn't just for the polyamorous people. This isn't just for people who are maybe looking at this going, well, yeah, I have, maybe multiple long-term partners, maybe multiple people I live with. And so this really is my life structure that I could be discriminated against, versus sometimes I think in, like, let's say more of the swinging world where it's like, well, this is a thing I do on vacation. Why do I even care? Right. And I don't think that most people are
why do others care?
Right. Why do I, like, it doesn't matter to me if this legislation passes because I do it on the weekends, right? Or I do it once a month or, twice a year, whatever it is. But I've really loved to see how you've pulled in people from both, I want to say both sides of this coin, this non-monogamous coin, which often gets divided between the swinging and the polyamory.
Sure.
And also just to say too, some of the people who have joined that are on more of the swinging side are so engaged and really caring. And I love to see these two worlds coming together, working together, even if maybe the direct thing that's being worked on isn't exactly for them, to be able to see a bigger picture that we're not just fighting for this relationship style. It's sort of more inclusion and equality as a broader spectrum, perhaps.
Yeah. So Finn, first of all, thank you for mentioning the week of visibility, which I 100% should have done.
We were going to ask you about it.
I got you.
I appreciate the backup there. So the week of visibility is one of the major programs under our visibility and acceptance strategy. Open coordinated the inaugural Day of Visibility in July of 2023. And this year it is growing into a full week of visibility that'll be celebrated from July 15th through 21st. So that'll be celebrated with online activities and events, as well as in-person events in communities all around the globe. It's an opportunity for people to get together, to celebrate our identities, our communities, our values, to really be there for one another, but also to step out and show ourselves to the world, to really be in conversation, to be in community with our neighbors, and really help make the point that, look, non-monogamous people are kind of everywhere, right? We come from all walks of life. We are your coworkers. We are members of your church congregation. We're your neighbors. And it's a really, really effective way to push back against those stigmas and those stereotypes, because decades of social science research show that people are far more accepting of minority identities or out-group identities when they know someone that holds those identities. So that's the first piece. People can learn more at weekofvisibility.com. Cannot believe that domain was available. We got lucky.
I had the same thought, by the way. When you announced it, I was like, wow, good for them. Way to find that. So
good job.
That may be the most valuable asset that Open owns. I mean, we don't own a lot of assets. I think it's like my computer monitor at this point. But anyways, so Finn, from there to the underlying question, it has been really important for Open from the start to build a big tent movement, because non-monogamy is an umbrella term. And it encapsulates a range of identities and practices, from polyamory to the swinger lifestyle, not to necessarily position those as opposite ends of a pole, but certainly as two of the major, I think, clusters. And then a whole range of other identities and practices around those as well, right? So people that practice open relationships or relationship anarchy, like, may not identify as polyamorous or in the swinger lifestyle, but very much are non-monogamous. And similarly, like, there is a whole range of what non-monogamy can look like in practice outside of those labels, right? So it could be a closed triad where they don't go to play parties, they don't date other people, they're in a long-term, closed, committed relationship. It could be a monogamous couple that once a year goes to, secret swinger retreat in Jamaica and, plays around with other couples. Or it could be, somebody practicing relationship anarchy and maintaining a whole range and network of partners. All of those people have a shared set of interests, largely having to do with the way that these practices, that anything non-normative, right? So outside the mononormative norm is viewed and treated in society. And so I think that's essential to open strategy, because we are far more powerful when we can bring folks together around a shared set of identities and interests. And so folks in the swinger lifestyle, I think, have somewhat been left out of this conversation. For a long time, it has been something that's very underground and secretive, and many people have been content with that. They find it hot. That's, great for them. But not everybody wants to worry that if they get spotted walking out of the, adult club, by their boss or pastor or whatnot, they're going to be outed. Not everybody wants to have to lie about where they went on vacation when what they really did was go to secrets in Jamaica and hook up with other couples. They don't want to have to lie to their coworkers when they get back and ask, where they got that great tan. So, people power gets things done, and creating a big tent movement is how we maximize our people power.
Yeah. I love that. I think the other piece that comes to mind in this, and this is sort of one of the things that people who've listened to our show for a long time hear me say often, or hear us say often, is I think it's the idea that you don't know when you'll find yourself in that other population,
in a different part of non-monogamy,
in that other cluster, right? There's the one of the things we often hear swingers say is, yeah, well, we don't do feelings. And I often say, until you fall in love, right? That's, we didn't do them either until we fell in love. And I can also, you hear it on more of the poly side, like, well, I'm not into casual sex. I don't just hook up with people. I need emotions and feelings. And until you have that experience where you do, and now you are,
it may or may not happen, but it's likely that it may.
Or just the possibility that you may.
Being open to that's what it is about. It's being about being open to the possibility of it.
And that regardless, they don't have to be opposed. And I think that is really the beauty of the big umbrella that you're putting out there, is that we're not opposed. We're all working together. There is, sort of the critical mass needed to make this work. And we all can't do it by ourselves. So just grateful to have organizers like yourself in the space doing the hard work. And it's not necessarily the sexy work, right? Like, it's probably a lot sexier to throw a fun party than it is to do advocacy work, I'm guessing, but maybe you have your own.
I mean, party organizing can be its own set of troubles too. I think the most fun is to go to the party and do neither the organizing.
Don't do the work.
It's interesting. I'll find myself, my work, obviously, this is my full-time job as executive director of Open. And so I will find myself at swinger clubs. I'm going to Naughty in New Orleans in June, the largest, lifestyle gathering in the world with like 2,500 people. And on the one hand, it can be really fun to be like, oh, I'm on a work trip and I'm here in the swinger club. And there's people fucking on the couch next to me. And at the same time, like, professional boundaries are still a thing. So like when I'm in those spaces, like, I'm in work mode, I do not take my clothes off. So it's, it's kind of fun. My more normie friends, or just friends that aren't in the non-monogamous space, we'll say, oh, that sounds like fun. You're going to go, fuck around at Naughty. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go table and like hand out brochures and stickers.
I'm trying to get the word out there.
Excuse me, do you have a moment to talk about policy change?
Exactly. They're like, no, we're trying to get to the orgy. It's a tough pitch. I don't know. I'm hot for that stuff. I always say social impact is my kink. So,
awesome.
that'll stop me.
Oh yeah. It's awesome. And I'm also curious, like, if people are listening to this and they really, hopefully many of you listening want to get involved, want to support, like, what are some of the best ways to do that?
Yeah. So if people are interested in learning more about our work and staying up to date on what we're doing, if they want to catch the word about upcoming planning meetings for the Week of Visibility or new resources, the best way to do that is to join our email list. So folks can visit open-love.org, click the join button at the top, or you can visit open-love.org/hello. And you'll see the buttons to all of our different social media feeds, our community Discord server where people can join and be in conversation with other organizers. And Open is a nonprofit. In 2023, which is our first kind of full calendar year operational, we were 97% grassroots funded. It's something I'm really proud of. It means that like we're not needing to compromise our political vision or our voice in the behest of foundation funders or corporate donors. It's also really challenging to sustain an organization fund fully on grassroots support. So we'd be really grateful for folks' support if they're interested in making a tax-deductible donation. So folks can contribute on our website, open-love.org/donate. And just to like make a little bit more of a pitch on that point specifically, or more of a point generally, and try and pull back from the pitch specifically, but looking at the size of the non-monogamous population, we know that conservatively 5% of American adults who are in relationships, that relationship is non-monogamous. Looking at younger generations, we know that fully a third of millennials and Gen Z say that their ideal relationship is something other than complete monogamy. So taking some of those numbers together, we're looking again at like conservatively 10 million American adults who are non-monogamous. And as we've touched on throughout this conversation, we are being impacted by a whole range of issues. So I think that there's a real demonstrated need for meaningful organizational capacity. If you look at comparable identity groups or comparable spaces, there are half a dozen organizations with millions of dollars of funding and dozens of staff members who are able to do the nitty-gritty work of organizing, who can be down there in the trenches, organizing policy conversations, putting together events. That is how change happens. Like it doesn't just happen on its own. It takes real people like dedicating real effort to it. And people also have to pay rent and eat. So that means like being able to raise money, to pay organizers to do this work professionally. So I just want to offer that, like, that's a little bit of, nonprofit professional musings, but I do think that there's a real case that non-monogamous community in 10 years, like certainly should have multiple organizations, frankly, like Open, that are able to drive real resources and real expert capacity to making this change. But to do that, we just need folks' support.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll maybe throw a little weight behind that, and I will call it a pitch, is the idea that a few things that I would just say to this. One is, if you are somebody out there who is wanting to make a difference and you're like, it's too risky, right? I can't put my name out there. I can't put my face out there. I can't get involved, but I know this needs to change, right? Writing a check, donating money is a great way. I also think too, there's so many people who are looking for community, and there's no secret that Emma and I talk about community all day long on this show. One of the most amazing communities you could be part of is this community, and there are ways to get involved, coming to the support, the non-monogamy support circles, reaching out. Maybe you have something you could offer for a week of visibility, right? There's so many of those events are grassroots organized. It's not you hosting each event or me and Emma hosting the events. It's thousands of people around the world doing it. So if you think you have something to offer, reach out, get in touch. And
absolutely. Yeah. This is a people-powered, authentically grassroots movement. So folks can reach out anytime at info@open-love.org. They can hit us up on social media. And I think that so many of us are hungry for an opportunity to help build a more just and joyous world.
Yeah.
And it can feel really challenging to know where to plug in with these like massive, hyper object issues that just seem so impossible for any one person to tackle. And in the non-monogamy space, we say, it's certainly not a new movement. Of course, we are building on the work of people that came before. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but I would still say an emerging movement, a civil rights movement, a social justice issue. And this is a space where at this stage, like people's energy, people's excitement really adds real meaningful value. It's a real meaningful way that people can make a difference, that people can meaningfully transform the lives of people that are practicing non-monogamy. And, as we touched on earlier, can really help build a more accepting, inclusive future where we put connection before competition, where we center compassion and consent and communication. And so I think that, not everyone needs to be non-monogamous, but non-monogamy and the skills involved in it are really part of the medicine that the world needs right now. So I really deeply believe that this is, not just important for ending the harm that non-monogamous people experience, but really can be something that provides deep, deep value to the world at large.
Yeah, totally.
And I would love people to be part of that.
Yeah. Yep. I agree completely.
We agree.
Yeah,
we agree completely.
Wasn't trying to single you out.
No, I know.
Emma and I have opposing views.
I'm just trying to chime in as well and just say yes.
Yeah.
And a quick reminder, anyone listening, like everything Brett said and that we've been talking about will be linked in the show notes. So you can just go there and find it all.
Yeah. And just, again, I encourage you to get involved in some way, shape, or form if you can, right? If you have the time, the energy, the finances.
And whatever, like at whatever level feels like you have the capacity for, like there is no right way to do this. Like there's whatever feels like you have availability in your life, whatever way you feel like you have availability to join, to help, to contribute, do the piece that feels like it fits in with your life.
Yeah, there's this great Ken Kesey quote that I like. He said, put your good where it'll do the most. And that's going to look different for everyone because everyone's good is a little different.
Yeah.
So we really just want to invite people to share what they think their gifts are, what they have to offer, what sparks joy for them.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Brett, first of all, for the work that you're doing, the work that you've done and continue to do, and for being here today, sharing a bit about your story and for being part of the work that we're doing. So we're very grateful for that. Is there anything that we haven't asked about or touched on today that you want to shout out into the world while you've got the microphone today?
Yeah, thank you so much, Finn and Emma, for having me. I've really appreciated this conversation and just really want to invite once again folks that are listening to this and are excited to be part of this movement to come on board. And I would love to hear from you, would love to hear your ideas, would love to invite you to be part of our work. So folks can visit open-love.org, learn more about our work. They can donate there, they can join our email list, or they can visit open-love.org/hello for all of our social media links or to join our Discord. And finally, folks can reach out to us at any time. It's info@open-love.org. We really see ourselves as being here, not to lead a movement, but to serve a movement. So we're really happy to hear from folks at any time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect. And I would just say maybe one more quick thing is if you don't have to be non-monogamous to reach out, to join, to be a part of this movement, right? Allies are incredibly important. And none of this work is to convert or convince people that this is the way. It is simply work to bolster the resources that those of us who are non-monogamous have. So we know we have tons of people who are listening who aren't necessarily non-monogamous themselves. This is also a great way to get involved and support a community that maybe you care about, even if it's not explicitly yours.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to draw us back too much into the weeds, but I do want to touch on that because allyship is really important, and it's also important to recognize that this work benefits more than just non-monogamous people. So to illustrate that, I mentioned the non-discrimination protections. The way that language is as drafted effectively prohibits discrimination on the basis of family or relationship structure. So the relationship structure piece obviously accounts for non-monogamous folks, but the family structure piece not only accounts for non-monogamous families, but also for a range of other non-nuclear family structures, as well as members of those families. So something that I learned recently that really excited me was that the children of LGBTQ parents currently fall into a loophole around protections because they are not trying to access protections based on their own identity, right? So protections against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation don't apply to those people's children. And so the family structure piece grants protections there. So I think it's illustrative of one way that this work spills over and is about a broader movement for inclusion and acceptance for everyone, and not just about non-monogamy people more narrowly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Such an incredible point to make and to add at the end. So
and you didn't take us into the weeds. I did. So I'll take the blame.
I'll hang on to the weeds all day.
Perfect. Well, once again, thank you, Brett. This was wonderful. We look forward to continuing to sort of run in these circles together and work together to hopefully build, I think, just a more equitable world in general. And this is sort of our contribution. So thank you again for the work you're doing.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you both. It's been a joy to speak with you. I look forward to seeing you out there.
And we're back.
Whoa.
All by myself. Growing up.
And we are back. Thank you, Brett, for everything.
Thanks for covering me just in case it wasn't good enough.
It was habit.
I've done that a few times to you. I earned that one.
Thank you, Brett, for everything. We love the work that you've been doing, and we loved hearing more about your personal story as well. Thank you again. And for anyone out there listening, we really encourage you to go check out Open's work and join join the week of visibility for ethical non-monogamy, July 15th to the 19th this summer.
Specifically July 17th, when Emma and I will be hosting our workshop.
Yes.
Is There a Right Way to Do Non-Monogamy workshop? It's an interactive workshop. It's going to be hella amazing. Yeah, hope to see you there.
We would love to see you there. The whole week will be full of in-person and events throughout the country and many virtual events. I know Brett and the entire team are working incredibly hard at this. So go check it out and join some of the events and join us as well.
Last thing we wanted to tell you all about.
Next week?
We have an interview next week with Mr. and Mrs. N. They are podcasters out of the UK, the Vanilla to Vixen podcast, and authors.
Yes.
A wonderful story. We can't wait to tell you about it. But we're going to have to wait because that's next week. Until then...
Actually, I think there's another episode coming out on Friday.
Do you think so?
Yes. And ask us anything. I
can't verify that, but perhaps that sounds accurate.
There is an Ask Us Anything episode coming out this Friday with Finn and Miche. And then, so listen to that and then come back next week to listen to Mr. and Mrs. N.
I can confirm that this is accurate. I edited it last night.
Okay. Awesome.
All right. We will see you all on Friday, and then we'll see you all next week, and we'll see you all in July.
Awesome.
And we'll see you all in our virtual community. We just want to see you.
Yes, or in our email inbox.
Or our voicemail inbox. All right.
We'll stop now.
Enough of us.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.